I'm John Batchelor, Hotel Mars, episode N. David Livingston, Dr. Space, The Space Show, joins me. David, a very good evening to you. Crisis in the Ukraine. Crisis at ISS. David, NASA's reporting all's well. Roscosmos the same. Are you convinced?
No, I think probably among the space people all is probably well, but there's a lot of parts and engines and electronics made in and around the Ukraine, so depending on how rough it might get over there or violent, some of those manufacturing facilities might be in the line of fire, and that could be damaging to the space program.
We welcome Anatoly Zak, author of Russia in Space, The Past Explained, The Future Explored, and we're needing a future exploring here, Anatoly, because you have the Russian and you're watching the Russian news in this very earthbound crisis in Ukraine. Do you read anywhere there is dissent, by popular dissent or dissent from the intelligentsia, the old nomenclatura, about continuing to provide what you'd have to say a subway service between the Cosmodrome and the ISS? Is that at risk anywhere you're reading, Anatoly?
Well, after watching the media, yes, it will look like it is at risk. But however, hopefully the cooler heads will prevail, and if as long as this crisis will not escalate, does not escalate any further, I think we will probably avoid any influence on space program or any kind of adverse effects on the space program, hopefully.
Anatoly, I'm going to pull rank on you because I'm old enough to have gone through the Cold War. One of the things that always happens in the Cold War is that it escalates. That's always what happens.
That's correct.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And so the facts right now, you see doubting voices, but you see no move by Roscosmos to cut off its contracts. You see nothing out of the Kremlin saying we're going to have to review this.
No, it's hard for me to imagine that somebody who is a supplier would actually cut their own source of income and source of prestige and source of cooperation, and something which was benefited them for many, many years. So I don't see them doing that.
David?
Hi, Anatoly. We have electronics, and the Antares by Orbital has components that are made over there in and around the Ukraine. What do you see the risk for collateral damage that might inadvertently interrupt the ISS or being able to get there or something like that?
Right. I understand we're talking about the Yuzhnaya factory in Dnepropetrovsk, which builds Zenit rockets, and that's the derivative of this Zenit rocket is the Antares launch vehicle. That's the sort of hardware or part of the International Space Station program, which is kind of exposed in this situation. However, remember again, right now the crisis is contained to Crimea right now. There are no space factories, at least, actively involved in the space program there. Dnepropetrovsk is in eastern Ukraine, and this area, apparently, I understand, it also saw some, demonstrations, and I understand some pro-Russian movement is in eastern Ukraine. However, as I understand, the work continues as usual. Life goes on, so hopefully it will not stop production or any kind of, any of the major activities will not be interrupted.
Anatoly, the Russian space program right now is getting ready to move to the far east, way east, over to the Amur, near the Amur River, and the Cosmodrome will become secondary. It's in Kazakhstan. But with this Ukrainian crisis right now, is that wise? I mean, is that wise to consider that they're going to put the Cosmodrome at risk over to China? Are people reconsidering because of this crisis in Ukraine, or is this seen as something that will fade away? You're watching the Russian space blogs very carefully. I'm just wondering about the speculation from the younger people.
At the beginning, when the Vostochny, that the program to build this new launch site in Far East was started, there were some conversations about the closeness to the Chinese border. It's a totally different issue. The relations between Russia, the Soviet Union, and China were, let's put it mildly, complicated.
Yes.
However,
very diplomatic.
Russian documents, strategic Russian Space Agency documents, actually said that when we placing this very important strategic facility into this region, we will actually demonstrate China that we are serious about economic cooperation, that we are serious about economic development of this region, and that will the calculation was on a part of Russia that China will be stimulated also to participate in different joint projects for the development of this region.
David?
Anatoly, if the West does apply some form of economic sanctions to Russia, do you see that as the type of escalation that could cause a problem with the ISS?
Potentially, absolutely. If again, for now, I understand the scenario is there are negotiations are going on in Paris, which would aim essentially to resolve the crisis, sort of freeze it where it is, and possibly to get some concessions to the Russians, which will prompt them to remove the armed forces out of China. Oh, I'm sorry, we're talking about China.
Out of Crimea, yes.
Out of Crimea, I'm sorry.
Right.
So if, and it seems to be even on, the Wall Street, I understand, was going up, so it looks like there are good prospects that this crisis will be sort of arrested where it is, and it will not spread. And that's the hope is. And again, again, we should remember that for Russia, manned space program, it's much more about prestige than about any military or any kind of economic activities. It's a prestige. It's a standing in the world. It's Olympics which go on forever. It's pretty much, something which are they very concerned as a sort of image of Russia. Outside of Russia.
You speak very well, Anatoly. You're a diplomat. They need you at the Foreign Ministry in Moscow. Let's go to the breaking news from Moscow in these last hours from ITAR TASS. The United Rocket and Space Corporation is registered in Russia, according to Russian Deputy Prime Minister Dmitry Rogozin on his microblog. The United Rocket and Space Corporation has been registered. We are beginning a large-scale reform of the domestic space industry. What is he talking about? What can we hope for?
Oh, this is the same part of the reforms. I think we spoke about this in one of the previous shows. This is still part of this reform of consolidating Russian space industry in a post-Cold War environment where they have a lot of duplication and a lot of sort of backup capacity which they don't really use. So they're trying to create this one conglomerate which would have one centralized offices, let's say, for accounting, for quality control, for everything under one roof, and then have all these companies sort of reporting to this central authority, so there is no duplication and there is no sort of bad coordination between their activities.
So this is a positive development there. We use the word streamlining. Does that apply to this?
Exactly. That's consolidation. Yes, it's what they say merger, or it's a consolidation of business pretty much when you have too much, way more than you need really.
You see, David, I look to the future. That's positive. Go ahead, David.
What is the opinion of the Russian public on the ISS? Is it a widely popular program? Do they know a lot about it? Is it something that they really, really are eager to see, keep on going and expanding?
Yes, we have Expedition 38 up there right now, by the way. I mentioned a mixture of cosmonauts and astronauts. Go ahead, Anatoly.
There is a sort of mixed feelings about this. You probably remember how the Mir was coming down 13 years ago, and of course Russians were very upset that Mir was going down and ISS was going up. So in a comparison, they really felt very nationalistic and very sort of patriotic about losing Mir and building ISS with Americans instead. However, in the intervening years, ISS was working very well, and Russian crews were working there with Americans, and it was on Russian TV very often, and so it is quite popular in Russian society, I would say. Anecdotally, I don't know exact numbers, but I would say that it's people do accept it as a part of the Russian space program, and they like it.
Anatoly, the crew, the cosmonauts and the astronauts serving together in the ISS, are the cosmonauts celebrated as heroes as they were during the Cold War in Russian society when they come back, or is this just a guy with a lunch pail who goes to work and goes home?
It's a little bit of both. It's exactly like in the United States. Nobody remembers names of astronauts or cosmonauts anymore. Everybody knows Gagarin and Tereshkova,
right.
But beyond them, the less people know about them. But they see them in general on TV. They know, many people do know that International Space Station is there. And I would say in Russian society, it's a little bit because of the TV and mass media mostly controlled by the state, so they see a little bit more news about space rather than, let's say, I won't name particular major channels which will never show space or very rarely show space. So it's a little bit more high profile in Russian society, the manned space program.
Anatoly Zak, he's the author of Russia in Space, The Past Explained, the Future Explored. I recommend it. This is a time to consider what a treat it is to have the Russian space program working with NASA. We just have to get the foreign ministers working together in a similar fashion. David Livingston, Dr. Space of The Space Show. Thank you, gentlemen. I'm putting my blaster away. We won't have to defend the space station tonight. I'm John Batchelor.